The hotel room in Los Angeles felt smaller than it actually was, crowded with the weight of a decision that could reshape metal history. Dimebag Darrell sat on the edge of a chair that had seen better days, his signature Dean ML guitar leaning against the wall like a silent witness to what was about to unfold. Across from him, Dave Mustaine leaned forward with the intensity that had defined Megadeth's entire existence, his eyes carrying both desperation and hope in equal measure. It was early 1991, and the conversation they were having represented a crossroads that would alter the trajectory of two legendary bands. Because what nobody knew, what even Pantera's inner circle wouldn't learn until years later, was that Dimebag Darrell actually said yes to joining Megadeth. He agreed to leave his brother Vinnie Paul behind, to abandon the Texas band that had raised him, to become the lead guitarist for one of thrash metal's founding acts. The handshake happened, the terms were discussed, and for approximately 18 hours, Dimebag Darrell was unofficially the newest member of Megadeth. Then something occurred in that hotel room the following morning that changed everything. A conversation that redirected metal history and ensured that Pantera's Cowboys from Hell era would continue uninterrupted. Before we reveal what made Dimebag reverse his decision and why Dave Mustaine never spoke publicly about this near miss that could have transformed both bands forever, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the untold stories that shaped metal's greatest legends. The year 1990 had been brutal for Megadeth in ways that went beyond typical band drama. They had just released Rust in Peace, an album that would eventually be recognized as one of thrash metal's masterpieces, featuring the virtuosic guitar work of Marty Friedman alongside Dave Mustaine's signature aggression. But the internal dynamics were combustible in ways that made Pantera's later struggles seem tame by comparison. Mustaine's perfectionism bordered on tyranny. His creative vision demanded absolute submission, and the revolving door of Megadeth members had become legendary within metal circles. By early 1991, tensions with the existing lineup were reaching critical mass, and Mustaine was already contemplating changes that would keep Megadeth's momentum going without sacrificing the technical excellence that defined their sound. He needed someone who could match his intensity, who understood the balance between technical precision and raw power, who could bring fresh energy without compromising the Megadeth identity. And increasingly, his attention focused on the young guitarist from Texas, who was making waves with a band that had just released an album challenging every assumption about what heavy metal could sound like. Dimebag Darrell, still sometimes called Diamond Darrell in those transitional months, represented everything Mustaine respected in a musician. His technical ability was undeniable, his stage presence was magnetic, and his commitment to heavy music ran deeper than fashion or trend chasing. Cowboys from Hell had dropped in July 1990 and immediately announced Pantera as a force that couldn't be ignored. The album sold respectably for an independent release. The tours were building momentum, and the Abbott brothers were proving that their transition from glam metal to crushing heaviness wasn't a gimmick, but a genuine evolution. But success in 1991 was relative, and Pantera was still fighting for recognition in a metal landscape dominated by established acts. They were the hungry challengers, not yet the champions, and that hunger made them vulnerable to offers from bands that had already achieved what Pantera was still pursuing. Dave Mustaine understood leverage, understood timing, and he made his approach at precisely the moment when Dimebag might actually consider leaving everything he had built with his brother. The initial contact came through intermediaries, the way these things often did in the pre-internet music industry. A phone call to Pantera's management, casual inquiries about Dimebag's satisfaction with his current situation, vague suggestions that opportunities might exist elsewhere. Then the direct approach, A message passed through a mutual acquaintance that Dave Mustaine wanted to meet face-to-face, privately, to discuss possibilities. The meeting was arranged for Los Angeles during a gap in Pantera's touring schedule, deliberately timed when Vinnie Paul would be back in Texas, handling band business. That separation was strategic. Mustaine wanted Dimebag alone, without his brother's protective presence, without the family dynamic that made the Abbott brothers a package deal. The hotel where they met wasn't fancy, just a mid-range place near the Sunset Strip where musicians routinely conducted the business of band formations and dissolutions away from public scrutiny. Mustaine arrived exactly on time, carrying the manic energy that characterized his entire approach to music and life, and he made his pitch with the directness of someone who had learned that subtlety was wasted on important negotiations. Megadeth needed a guitarist who could elevate their already high technical standards, who could bring new creative energy while respecting the established Megadeth sound. The money would be significantly better than what Pantera was currently generating. The tours would be bigger venues. The album sales were already in the hundreds of thousands, compared to Pantera's tens of thousands, and the platform would give Dimebag immediate access to a global metal audience that knew Megadeth as one of the genre's defining acts. Mustaine painted a picture of stadium tours, platinum albums, creative collaboration with one of metal's most respected songwriters, and artistic validation that came from being part of thrash metal royalty. He acknowledged the situation with, Marty Friedman was complicated. Relationships within Megadeth were always complicated, but the opportunity was real and the timeline was immediate. They could make an announcement within weeks, begin writing for the next album within months, and by the end of 1991, Dimebag could be on stage in front of 50,000 people playing Megadeth classics alongside new material that would define the next era of the band. The pitch was compelling, professionally delivered, and backed by the tangible reality of Megadeth's established success versus Pantera's ongoing struggle for mainstream recognition. What happened next was something Dimebag would later describe to close friends as both the most exciting and most conflicting moment of his professional life. Because sitting in that hotel room, listening to Dave Mustaine outline a future that seemed simultaneously thrilling and impossible, Dimebag found himself nodding along, found himself imagining what it would feel like to step onto a stage as Megadeth's guitarist, found himself calculating whether the opportunity was worth the sacrifice it would require. The conversation stretched past midnight, moving from business logistics to creative philosophy to personal assurances about working relationships and artistic freedom. Mustaine could be intense and demanding, but he was also genuinely passionate about music in ways that resonated with Dimebag's own obsessive dedication to guitarcraft. They talked about tone, about riff construction, about the balance between technicality and emotion that separated great metal from merely competent metal. And somewhere in those early morning hours, with exhaustion lowering defenses and possibility feeling more real than the obstacles, Dimebag Darrell extended his hand and said yes. The handshake was firm. The commitment felt genuine in that moment, and Mustaine's smile carried the satisfaction of someone who had just secured a piece that would complete his vision. They discussed timeline details, talked about when to make the announcement, agreed that Dimebag would need to have difficult conversations with Vinnie Paul and the rest of Pantera before anything became public. Mustaine understood the complexity, had been through enough lineup changes to know that departures required careful management, and he was willing to give Dimebag a few days to handle the personal side of the transition. But the agreement was clear. Dimebag was joining Megadeth. The deal was done, and by summer 1991, metal would have a new supergroup configuration that would dominate conversations and sales charts. When they finally parted around 3 in the morning, Dimebag walked back to his own hotel room, carrying the weight of a decision that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. He had just agreed to abandon his brother, to leave the band they had built together since childhood, to pursue individual success at the cost of family unity. The logic made sense professionally, but emotionally, it felt like betrayal. And as he lay in bed, unable to sleep, the enormity of what he had committed to began replacing excitement with dread. Dimebag didn't call Vinnie Paul immediately, couldn't bring himself to make that call in the middle of the night when emotions were still too raw and uncertain. Instead, he waited until morning, sitting in his hotel room as Los Angeles woke up outside his window, rehearsing different versions of the conversation in his head. How do you tell your brother, your bandmate since childhood, your partner in every musical dream you've ever pursued, that you're leaving for a better opportunity? How do you explain that individual ambition has outweighed collective loyalty, that the promise of Megadeth's established platform is worth more than Pantera's potential? Every version of the conversation he imagined ended badly, with hurt feelings or angry accusations, or worst of all, quiet acceptance that would confirm his decision was fundamentally selfish. But the call had to be made, and around 9 in the morning California time, 11 in Texas, Dimebag picked up the hotel phone and dialed his brother's number. Vinnie answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the easy familiarity of someone who had no reason to expect life-altering news, and Dimebag started talking before he could lose his nerve. He explained about the meeting with Mustaine, tried to articulate the opportunity in ways that would make it seem reasonable rather than treasonous, emphasized the financial security and career advancement that Megadeth represented. And Vinnie Paul, to his eternal credit, didn't explode or guilt-trip or even argue initially. He listened in silence as his younger brother explained why he was planning to leave Pantera, and that silence was somehow worse than anger would have been. When Vinnie finally spoke, his voice carried a flatness that Dimebag had never heard before, an emotional shutdown that signaled damage too deep for immediate processing. Vinnie said he understood, said he wouldn't stand in the way of Dimebag's career, said the practical things that people say when they're trying to maintain dignity while being devastated. But then, just before ending the call, Vinnie said something that would echo in Dimebag's mind for the rest of his life. He said that Pantera was more than a band, it was family, and that some opportunities cost more than their worth, and that he hoped Dimebag knew what he was giving up, because once you break certain bonds, you can't repair them just by coming back later when things don't work out. The hotel room felt different after that phone call, the walls somehow closer, the air heavier with implications Dimebag hadn't fully considered before making his decision. He sat on the bed, replaying Vinnie's words, thinking about everything they had built together since they were kids playing music in their father's studio, remembering the countless shows in Texas bars when nobody cared about their music, recalling the mutual commitment they had made when transitioning Pantera from glam to heavy. The Abbott brothers weren't just bandmates. They were a unit, a partnership that had survived lineup changes and musical reinventions, and all the normal chaos of pursuing unlikely dreams. And now Dimebag was planning to dissolve that partnership for Dave Mustaine's approval and Megadeth's bigger platform. The logic that had seemed so compelling at 3 in the morning, exhausted and flattered by one of thrash metal's legends, looked different in daylight after hearing his brother's carefully controlled devastation. Dimebag thought about what success would actually mean if it came at the cost of the relationship that had made his entire musical career possible. He thought about standing on stage with Megadeth playing to huge crowds, while knowing that Vinnie Paul was somewhere else, probably having given up on Pantera entirely without his brother and musical partner. The realization crystallized slowly but completely. He had made the wrong decision. The opportunity was real, the logic was sound, but the cost was too high. Some things mattered more than career advancement, and the bond with his brother was one of them. By early afternoon, Dimebag had made another phone call, this one to Dave Mustaine, and the conversation was significantly shorter and more uncomfortable than their meeting had been. He explained that he couldn't go through with the agreement, that family loyalty outweighed professional opportunity, that he appreciated the offer but needed to stay with Pantera and his brother. Mustaine's response was predictably intense, a mix of anger at having his time wasted and disbelief that anyone would turn down Megadeth for a band that was still struggling for mainstream recognition. He accused Dimebag of lacking ambition, of being controlled by his brother, of making a decision he would regret when Pantera inevitably failed to achieve what Megadeth had already accomplished. The call ended badly, with Mustaine making it clear that this opportunity wouldn't be offered again, and Dimebag accepting that he had just closed a door that many guitarists would have killed to walk through. The 18 hours between saying yes to Dave Mustaine and calling back to reverse that decision represented a turning point that shaped the rest of Dimebag Darrell's career and life. He had glimpsed an alternate future, had actually committed to it, and then had chosen family loyalty over individual ambition in a way that would define his relationship with Vinnie Paul for years to come. When Dimebag returned to Texas and reunited with Pantera, he never publicly discussed the Megadeth offer with anyone outside the band's immediate circle. Vinnie Paul knew what had happened, understood the significance of his brother's decision to stay, and that understanding deepened their partnership in ways that went beyond music into the realm of unbreakable trust. The Cowboys from Hell era continued, followed by Vulgar Display of Power in 1992 and Far Beyond Driven in 1994. Albums that would eventually establish Pantera as one of metal's most influential bands and prove that Dimebag's decision to stay had been vindicated by commercial and artistic success that matched or exceeded what Megadeth achieved during the same period. Dave Mustaine never spoke publicly about the offer to Dimebag or the brief acceptance that was reversed, maintaining his characteristic secrecy about Megadeth's internal machinations and near-miss lineup changes. But people within both bands' circles knew the story, understood how close metal history had come to a radical reconfiguration, and recognized that Dimebag's ultimate decision to prioritize family over opportunity had prevented a scenario where Pantera might have dissolved in 1991 before ever achieving the success that made them legends. The incident also revealed something essential about Dimebag's character that fans and critics would recognize throughout his career. His loyalty ran deeper than ambition. His commitment to the people he cared about outweighed the pursuit of individual glory, and his understanding of what actually mattered in life extended beyond stage size and album sales into the realm of relationships and integrity that couldn't be measured in platinum certifications. Looking back from the perspective of decades later, the near miss of Dimebag joining Megadeth reads like a sliding doors moment, where the entire trajectory of metal could have shifted based on one decision made in a Los Angeles hotel room. If Dimebag had followed through on his initial yes, if he hadn't called Vinnie and heard the devastation in his brother's voice, if he had prioritized career over family, the metal landscape of the 1990s would have been fundamentally different. Pantera might have continued with a different guitarist, but without the Abbott brothers' partnership that defined their identity. The band would have lost the core dynamic that made their music and their brotherhood legendary. Megadeth might have benefited from Dimebag's technical skills and stage presence, But the creative chemistry and the band's trajectory through the 90s would have been altered in ways impossible to predict, and Dimebag himself would have been a different artist, successful perhaps, but without the grounding that came from maintaining the family bond that had been his foundation since childhood. The story serves as a reminder that the biggest career decisions aren't always the most dramatic or publicly visible ones. Sometimes the most important choice is the one to stay rather than leave, to maintain loyalty rather than pursue opportunity, to recognize that some relationships and partnerships are more valuable than any individual advancement. Dimebag made that choice in a hotel room over the course of 18 hours, and while the world never knew how close he came to a completely different path, the decision shaped everything that followed for him. For Vinnie Paul, for Pantera, and for the fans who would eventually experience the full Cowboys from Hell through Far Beyond Driven era that might never have happened if that phone call with his brother had gone differently.